Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a session around AI, which everyone is obsessing over right now. So I get quizzed or phoned or taken out for coffee every week by managing partners, often of law firms, asking me what everybody else is doing about it. And I wrote some blogs recently where I made the accusation that people are a bit like rabbits in the headlights and they're only looking at the cost cutting tool element of it and not as a growth tool. So I thought I'd better ask someone else who has far more knowledge about this than I to join me to help people make some decisions around AI implementation. So I'm fortunate today that I've been able to get Chantal McNaught, who is currently doing a PhD in law at Bond University, and also is Director of Ethics and AI Practices at 43 Degrees Below, to help me unpack some of the challenges that people might be facing here. So Chantal, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Alistair. It's an absolute pleasure to talk about all things AI.
So you work with a lot of legal practices, I know. So what are you hearing from law firms? Whenever AI comes up, where's the discussion start?
Yeah, and there is a lot of buzz, as you said, and there seems to be a few camps. There are those that are do nothing about this until there's a problem. There's also the camp where we need to buy a product. What would you recommend? And there's also another camp as well about we've bought some products and we've done some piloting, but we're not really sure where the of investment is. And so that's really a big, culture and leadership piece.
So why do you think so many people are stuck? If I use that phrase, some people are stuck between, well, we
Mm.
don't need to do something. And then there are other people I spoke to, even just this week, where a chairman of partners in the law firm said to me, we're just going to wait and see until someone else gets it right, and then we'll copy that.
Yeah, I think it won't be of anybody's surprise to say that lawyers are risk averse, that we're trained to have this superpower of identifying risk. But when it comes to legal education, risk management, and the controls that are in place, isn't quite there yet. So when it comes to having to do something, it can really feel like a sticking point, and let's just wait until somebody else figures out how to deal with that risk. Now, I don't want to be the one convincing people that you should have to use. Other, it is about thinking what is enough knowledge to stay out of trouble. And now that we've got AI in everything, like literally my washing machine has AI in it. I feel as if we're going to have, a bag of peas at the supermarket's going to say now with AI. I'm looking at you, Adobe. And then that education piece then becomes like a really big part of the professional responsibilities for lawyers. So that's where that risk management side can help with the unsticking, I hope.
So how do you address or the real risk is, I guess, that firms who do absolutely nothing and say, we'll wait. If we're having this conversation in 12 months' time, I'm guessing the world might look slightly different. So, what would you say to those types of people?
Yeah, honestly, it's going to be stressful. Like, and only you as a leader will know precisely what your particular position and firm are in. But thinking about all the other stresses, this is something that, a lot of Australian firms are having to deal with right now, as we record this in April, is AML. There are so many different stresses. I had another firm earlier this week talk to me about the new Property Law Act. And if you wait for 12 months and to have a problem come to you, then will you have the time and energy and capacity to deal with that new additional stress? Or is it going to be better to anticipate what that might look like so you have a little bit of an action plan?
So, a common question I get is, Alistair, what's everybody else doing? And should we buy
Mm.
Legora or should we buy Harvey? And it tends to be a platform choice, if anything. So, instead of that question, what are the questions they should actually be asking here before they get started?
Yeah, it's tough because like there's so many now, right? And that is almost close to a good question, in the sense that rather than asking what solution to purchase, reframing it to be like, what problems are we looking to solve that might have been previously impossible? We've learned to live with them, but might now be more possible to solve with this new technology. And that way you start from a place where you can start to see value straight away, and it can help you ask the right questions from the vendors and get the value you need out of it.
So law firms have been similarly structured for 200 years, with a classic pyramid model in many cases. So if you were going to design a law firm from scratch today, would you design it differently, do you think? Would you build it differently than how it's been done in the past?
Yeah, look, I am still a little bit of a fan of David Maister. I think that he talks a good game on that. And but whilst 43 Degrees Below is not a law firm, we have built it differently from that traditional professional services model, in the sense that looking at what we needed in terms of going, okay, we're going to be helping professionals with this navigation piece of AI fluency. We're going to need tools to support how we do that. And that's where I looked at various different learning management platforms to support that. And then we go from there. So that's a little bit different to how we would normally take a standard traditional business model, where you go, okay, how many headcounts do we need? That kind of thing. It's let's look at purpose, tools, and then go from there and evolve as well. Like, everything is iterative at this stage.
So do you think Australian firms are lagging behind the rest of the world? I know often I talk to firms and they perceive that Australia is ahead of the game. But I guess there's another side to it where people think they talk about it a lot, but in terms of adoption, it's actually a straggler and it's possibly behind other jurisdictions around the world. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, it's I like the quote from, there was a, I think it is a sci-fi novel where it's, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. And that what comes to mind, because you're absolutely right with that observation, Alistair, that there are those that are very much at the forefront, and those that are what we would deem as the laggards. But I don't necessarily think that there's an issue with either side. I can argue for both sides, and that really what the lawyerly middle ground looks like is more of that cautious optimism, that it's not an all-out no, but at the same time, running headlong into tools that you don't quite understand can leave you without a principal practicing certificate and a business, like what we saw in the Re-Dial case.
So we have seen some pretty common mistakes made by people who have already made a start, when they experiment and do it the wrong way. Any advice there?
Yeah, it's first thing is we need to have compassion for those that have tried, and looking at those disciplinary cases, it's very easy for us to stand back and go, well, that was a bit silly, and clearly the mistakes were very apparent. Because the thing about generative artificial intelligence and the tools that are being encouraged for lawyers to use, in particular around drafting and legal research, they are incredibly charismatic and convincing. In fact, there was a Canadian case where a lawyer, despite having it pointed out to them by the judge that their cases were fabricated, the lawyer then doubled down and tried to make the argument, but the points were good still, Your Honour. Like, that I want to stress is not uh, a that is not a something that where the lawyer has something wrong with them. It is more to do with the fact that this technology is so powerful and convincing. So that's something to keep in mind. I do have a whole list as well around how lawyers can be a little bit more sensible around those things too. And that starts with having a good framework that's based in ethics.
And presumably you'll be giving advice to people on a daily basis about risk and governance and all of those topics, I would imagine.
Yes, that's where those frameworks are, because the way that I view ethics is it's the philosophy of decision making.
And do you think there's a big gap between larger firms who might have bigger budgets? So I think some of the bigger firms have already got their own people on board. So they might have full-time people just like yourself advising them or writing codes and stuff. And then you might have smaller firms using platforms that have some AI built in, like Smokeball. And then I think there's a big challenge sat in the middle of we feel obliged that we have to buy a platform, but we don't know which. If we do it,
Yeah.
how do we test it? Do we test it across the whole firm? Do we just say, okay, we'll start with litigation or we start with employment law? Have you seen any good, bad, or indifferent people when it comes to trying?
Yeah, I'm going to borrow a phrase from the security side of things, cybersecurity, where there's the common phrase is you can't buy security. Security is a practice. And that's the same with getting the success and the value out of AI. You don't need to have a seven-figure technology and consulting budget to really get the value out of it. What success can look like is having a definable framework for the tools. So that is everybody in the organization knows what they can, should, and should not use. And the next is when it comes to those pilot programs, if you have decided to already purchase, to have performance indicators that actually move the needle and aren't feel good indicators, because at the end of the day, and this is where your growth expertise comes in, all of the business activities need to actually have some kind of benefit
Yeah,
to the
the
business.
technology platforms are supposed to help you deliver the strategy, but it's not the strategy itself. You have to
That's
work out
right.
what that is first before you then pick the tools. But lots of people get that the wrong way around, I think. Like many people who've bought Salesforce as a wonder toy to solve all their CRM troubles and hope the business development issues go away, have found out it's not the case. And you need to have a strategy and something that knows about where you're going and share it. And that comes down to training as well. So I spoke to someone last week who shared with me that every Wednesday they have a prompt engineering session with all of their
Mm.
people where they're teaching them the prompts and they share, success and less successful stories amongst themselves to work out how the prompt engineering can get better results out of the AI, which I thought was tremendous. So
I think
that
that's
in mind,
absolutely excellent as well, because having those safe spaces to share not just the success but the failure really helps with navigating this technology, because it's not a linear technology; it's kind of jagged.
yeah. So think about then, what would a sensible first 90 days look like for someone who's serious about doing this? Have you got an idea of what a roadmap might look like?
Yeah. So the like at 43 Below, we have a 90-day program, and so that gives a roadmap. First, you learn about your own unique learning profile, and then you learn how the AI learns. That is about applying some frameworks as well about managing your own learning style so you can focus on what's important and reduce the noise, because there's so much buzz, especially on LinkedIn, making us feel like we have a lot of fear of missing out, a lot of FOMO. And so it's about reflecting on what is necessary for your own work. Then you create your own action plan that includes a low risk assessment, a low risk experiment each week, and a workflow within the first 30 days so that you have a capability goal in that you are able to achieve within the first 90 days.
I think people do just perceive it as a cost-cutting tool rather than
Mm.
how it can be used as to help them grow or even going to see a client, sit down side by side and co-author something. What's the problem here? We need to navigate that the tool's going to allow us to do together. That cements relationships with big key accounts before the issue of I think you're using AI, therefore you need to cut your prices, comes along. Because everyone knows that conversation is going to come at some point. And it's interesting how you address it. So I know my tongue is firmly in my cheek here, but when people have asked me, how do I respond with that currently? I say, well, you actually should put your price up because you've bought a platform which you're paying expensive subscription fees for, but you've not actually worked out how properly, how to make it work for you. So you can't pass the discount on because you haven't actually yet helped save any cash. In fact, if anything, you're probably spending more while you're learning. But as I say, I'm not expecting, if anyone's listening, I'm not advocating that you should put your price up immediately. That's not what I was going to say.
But it's a good point though on the value piece. And I have heard that Meta have been going through their panel lawyers itemization and highlighting the sorts of tasks that are in the bills on what AI could feasibly do. And it goes back to that earlier question about what to do before it becomes a problem. Well, that whole value question can be to find out through that exercise, what are those key activities that you do that actually provides more value, and then how does AI help you support that.
So another thing that I've talked about is AI in some ways relies on the quality of clean data, or data as we call it down here in the Southern Hemisphere. And I go to lots of firms who just hit problems right there because they have old lists of clients and they have duplicates and out-of-date emails and all sorts of things. So am I right in thinking that one of the first places you need to start is cleaning your data?
I'm not going to say like outright no to that, because you should be looking after your because because it's the foundation of your your practice management system and your overall productivity. That contributes to the I like to reframe, because I'm an eternal optimist, beautiful in, beautiful out. However, AI can help circumnavigate that a little bit as well, because not all AI tools have to be completely embedded into those data systems to be really effective. If you're looking at some augmentation, for example, as opposed to merely assistance and filtering up data, well, you might want to have the control of telling the machine, this is the small window of context and the things that I want you to look at. I don't want you to look at all of the history of email rubbish over there. So it's not necessarily going to be a point of hindrance. However, if you want a complete integrated system where you don't have to have that separate augmentation and develop that fluency for that mode of operation, then if you've already made the investment, continue to clean your data.
I think there is some naivety around, though. People think even if I sign up for Claude work at $20 a month, all my problems are solved. And I'm thinking, well,
can't do the work for you.
That's not what I'm hearing. And, even I spoke to a chief technology officer recently who said, people have to understand that whatever platform you use, like a Harvey or a Legora, you're still going to have it talk to your practice and the document management system. And you might even need to plug in with iManage or NetDocs or have a suite of technology working together to give you exactly what you need coming out of the other end. Is that what you would also see?
I actually wouldn't recommend that for everyone. It's yes, for a lot of practices that would be ideal. However, like I said before, it really depends on how you want to construct your workflow. So depending on where you are in that continuum of you're really only just starting out to you already got some piloting together, maybe if you're on that end with the piloting, you've already identified that a key benefit and risk if you don't take action is that you need to have that integrated in your systems. So that's going to be a deeply unique question for how your practice runs and the sorts of workflows that you want to be using this technology to enhance what you do.
So it seems like the piloting is going to be key for people. They need to test it in some area or element of the firm. Like they might just pick employment law or they might pick litigation or something, but test it before they roll it out for everybody. I would think that's
And
important.
yeah, and before testing it as well, at least having some base education around its capabilities and limitations. So you have some ground rules on that test, and whether you want to do that via an area of practice, or you want to have smaller groups within multiple areas of practice that can learn from each other, because employment and commercial, they have some overlapping workflows, but are going to come at it from different angles and can learn from each other.
So my perception would be that law schools at the moment are quickly having to add things to their curriculums to help people do this type of thing. But for those who have not been through that process, I believe you've developed like a diagnostic tool for firms to assess their own AI capabilities and what's possible. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so the program, like I said before, it gives you a roadmap. But so before you get the roadmap, you need to know how you learn and what you're like under pressure as well. What is the things that are naturally going to stick? Because we, as adult learners, we are all different, and in that sense of what sticks. So it doesn't necessarily give you a number and then you sent on your way. It helps give you a indication about where you're going to be sitting on the AI fluency continuum, and then you're able to use that information to know what your next step is in terms of getting the most out of your investments and growing your firm.
So once they have that information, how would they take that forward? What would they do with the information that the diagnostic tool gives them?
Yeah, so we provide a calibration report that explains what the profile is for you, and how your best AI modality. For example, you might be more of an applied practitioner, so a real life workflow task is going to yield a better way of learning and better results than an experimental mode of like what if scenarios that more of an exploratory experimenter type learner would have.
So in the past, I've heard you talk about 4D fluency. And if I'm
Mm.
honest, I perhaps didn't remember everything you might have told me. But I suspect it's quite important. So can you share 4D fluency with people listening
Of,
here?
of course. And repetition is key to learning as well. So
Absolutely.
the
You can
4D.
teach old dogs new tricks, Chantal.
Exactly. And me repeating it as well helps my learning too. So the 4D framework for AI fluency was developed by researchers Richard Dagan and Joseph Feller, alongside Anthropic, which have produced Claude, for example. But it's not platform specific. You don't need to use Claude to get the most out of the fluency framework. Now, the 4Ds or dimensions cover the delegation. Is this a job for AI? Because AI can't do legal reasoning, at least not yet. So we really shouldn't be delegating any kind of analysis or legal reasoning to AI. I like to use the rule of the thumb of how much of a human impact is this task going to have. The lower the human impact, the lower the risk, the more appropriate it probably could be delegated to AI, and then vice versa. The second is description, which is more than just prompt engineering. You probably have heard all of the buzz. Prompt engineering is dead. Prompt engineering is king. Which one is it? Well, it is about formulating a deep understanding of the outcome that you want to get out of the AI. So that also is a communication piece, which is why it's D for description. And then the third is discernment, which is what lawyers are incredibly capable of doing, which is assessing, evaluating, and critiquing. But at the same time, something we need to get better at doing as well is responding and coming back up after failure, because AI is a little bit spiky when it comes to its abilities. Just take, for example, trying to put information into a table. It does it wonderfully, but then you get the AI to number the table. It can handle it to a certain degree, and then it kind of slips a bit. And that's what researchers call the jagged frontier, things that we intuitively think that a task that's adjacent to another, it would be good at. It just isn't. And that feels like failure, especially when we have really important work as lawyers to do. So that's where the D for discernment is incredibly important there. And then finally, it's diligence, which isn't just working really hard, it's taking responsibility and accountability, because as lawyers, you're licensed, you're the ones where the legal professional privilege assigns to, not the machine.
Yeah, there's also, I think, somewhere down the line going to be an effect on insurance. Insurance
Mm.
premiums might also change on what's going on with or the level of AI usage. It should be interesting going forward. So I'm conscious of time. So for someone who's watched this and we've made them think, okay, maybe we should do something rather than wait and do nothing for 12 months, and we need to get serious about this, what's the next step that they should take?
Yeah, please consider taking the diagnostic and review your results. Take them on board and have those robust conversations with yourself about what your next step should really look like, about whether it is around buying something or taking the next step forward after you've made your purchase and you've tried piloting and that kind of thing, so that you are able as a leader to lead your team through this period of immense opportunity.
So I'm thinking, if I'm listening to this, I'm thinking I need to reach out to Chantal and shoot her an email that says, Chantal, I'd love to have a go at this diagnostic tool. So can you share with listeners what your email address might be so they can furnish you with their details?
Yes. Thank you, Alistair. It's Chantal, Chantal, at 43dbelow.com.
Okay, do you just want to repeat that one more time? Because otherwise I'll be inundated with people who get it wrong.
Chantal, Chantal, at 43, that's the numbers, 43, D for Delta, but just the D, and then below.com.
Okay, I'm going to thank you hugely for helping us and give us some direction there on the moving forward. I will put this up on all channels, and I don't doubt that you will be inundated with people looking to take your diagnostic tool. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and I wish you well with it all.
Cheers, Alistair. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Enjoyed it.